plenty of fair.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for being here.
Am I in front of that?
That's from before, don't worry about it.
Hi, I'm Jessica Sally.
How are you?
Hi, baby. Hi, everybody. Hello. Nice to see you.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Do you all want to do introductions? Is that a good way to?
Yeah, I think so. I'm Sally Bagshaw. I am a council member here, representing E7, and just got out of a council meeting. So thank you for waiting for us.
Yeah, I'm Dan Strauss. I work for Councilmember Bagshaw, policy advisor.
I'm Yolanda, and I'm council central staff working on city legislation and other details of council staff.
Do you want us to introduce ourselves?
Well, everybody has
Yeah, we
name
do.
tags
Okay,
out.
good.
So, Wes, do you want to introduce this, or how would you want us to dive in?
I'd be happy to kind of cue it up.
Okay, great.
And then please feel free to adjust or modify.
Yeah.
First of all, I want to thank you both for coming, and I want to thank you both from central staff and coming in. A really nice addition to have to this conversation. Thank you very much. So as we were all just discussing as you walked in, we feel like we're very much in the home stretch of something when it comes to the revision of the tree ordinance. This is a 10-year process at this point, and we're just so thankful that you want to take this out at this point in time and see this across the finish line. It's something we've all put a lot of work into, and we're just really appreciative of that. And to have you here today to talk about it is really central.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for having us. So, I think I should tell you for starters that I have what all of you worked on and what Rob Johnson worked on last year. So, Dan, thank you for providing me with some notes. So we know there was work done in May, then there was more adjustments done in June, and then I've had this sense that there was this strange silence during all the MHA work that happened. So I'm the first to admit that I am not on top of it as much as you all are. But I can be very quickly because I've got very able helpers. So what I'm really interested in now is there consensus? Because I'm hearing from people that are like, no way, we still don't like where you are. You have to do a tree survey first, and you've got to do a year worth of review about canopy, and then others saying, no, we don't need that. Then I'm also hearing that what Portland has accomplished is a simpler model, but it's preserving trees and it's moving forward. So I'd love to just hear from you. So if you're thinking about what's next, essentially taking the temperature of the commission, because I have deep, deep respect for you and work you do. And I know some of you know, but it's totally the true story that I got into politics because of one cherry tree in my backyard. So, you know, that was about 30 years ago, something that I felt very strongly about, and then ended up on Lake Forest Park City Council. You know, no good deed goes unpunished. Okay, so if I can just leave it there, and you tell me where you are, what you're thinking, what you'd like. If we can reach agreement, I have a finance committee that meets twice a month, and so tell me what you're thinking and what result you would like to see.
Great, thank you. I think the commission has stated in the past that the biggest result would be to get revised ordinance across. If in fact it holds some of the core principles, but again, as you laid out, I think we're starting to coalesce some agreement around the 6-inch threshold, the adoption of a permit system, a required replacement, fee in lieu for those few instances where replacement is impossible, improved enforcement to make sure that that system operates well, continued use of exceptional tree protections, and a better way to integrate that into a system where we can actually ensure that that's happening.
So who's talked with SDCI, with Nathan Torvalds and his deputies about the
cost, how we would move forward with this. Does anybody?
We haven't discussed that level of detail in terms of cost. We've had representatives from SDCI at a couple different levels. Yeah, thanks. We have Steve Zemke on the phone,
Hey,
who's
Steve Zemke.
unfortunately unable to join us in person. Steve, you able to hear us?
Yeah, but I'm hearing you good, I'm hoping hard.
Okay, we'll reposition you. Want to make sure you can be a part of this. So I think I just broadly laid out some of the core principles of what we're looking at that I believe, again, there is some level of consensus. The things that we put forth in recommendation, the things that generally are reflected in then Mayor Burgess's executive order 2017-11, and the things that were generally reflected in the companion resolution to the MHA, section 5 that you all put out. So to your question about is there consensus, I think broadly on a good chunk of the issues there is. I think we'd all be interested in hearing what you alluded to around where you're not hearing consensus, where you're hearing different opinions.
So I've had a number of phone calls that come into the office with people not on the board, but who have felt very strongly that before we move forward with any legislation, we should have a tree count, tree survey, helping out with what else?
Natural capital surveys,
And I'm open to all these things. I'm also, and something that Yolanda and Ally can also jump in on as far as timing goes. If we have to go through an appeal, if there's, I want it to be successful. So let me put that. Let's just pretend for the sake of argument that everybody around this board just believes fully that we could put something together and we all agree. We need to be thinking about, well, who's going to appeal, how long that takes. And then from the standpoint of our Department of Inspections and Construction, if they're going to want, if we're going to be asking for permitting, they're going to be wanting to know, okay, who's going to do that and how much is it going to cost? And, you know, we could say, well, it's not a big deal, but I'll tell you, if you are a property owner, it's a big deal. If you're going to want something and you want a permit, you're going to want it fast. You're not going to want to have to say, okay, I'm 6 months in the queue before I can get a permit for my tree. So thinking of it like, how many people is it going to take? And if round numbers, you think that a fully loaded, competent inspector is $125,000 more or less, you know, how many of those do you need? If you need 5, you've got $600,000 that we're gonna have to budget. And so, not to be a spoiler, just to be a realist, that those are things that we have to think about.
I think at a minimum, to the staffing question, it's pretty much been one most of the year with someone filling in, and now we have Deb from Parks, who's also with SDCI, and I think that's really helpful, but there's still a tremendous wait. On average, our clients are submitting permits, and it's 3 to 4 months wait for a hazard tree to even be entered into the system and even assessed at all.
Yeah, I can't imagine that people will accept that.
Yeah, and so I definitely think at a minimum, I think you're, at a minimum, 1 extra would be great, but I think 5 is a really ambitious number. I feel like 4 would really improve, because even getting that down to 1 month wait, I
Yeah.
think is more reasonable.
Right.
So-
I can't imagine that we could expect people to do more than a month's wait without starting to have, you know, torches and pitchforks coming at us.
Especially with the new fee associated with
Yeah,
it.
Ally, you've got something that you want to add?
Yeah, and I was just gonna say, so that position that was added in SDCI this year, that is specifically around permitting, so sort of looking at tree stuff related to development. proposals, right? And what we're talking about here is setting up a permitting system for trees like, so outside of a redevelopment proposal. And so that's a whole, so what you're discussing can be tied to permit fees generally. This would be setting up a whole kind of new shop. And so I think that, not also to be a Debbie Downer, but I think the lift is big. And to create a system that we want people to comply with, you don't want a permit fee that is so high that people just can do it under the cover of night, right? Because
Exactly.
they don't want to get caught, and if it's not funded properly, and so to have it be cost recovery, like, it's trying to balance a reasonable set of expectations that can be effectively enforced, and that people will want to comply with. And so it's that balance that I think is tricky, is figuring out, because there's a lot of demand on the city general fund for things, and so if it's not covered by the fee, then it's a general fund subsidy.
So we just heard from SDOT that they have a system set up for private citizens to get permits for street trees. They have their own system, and they have an amazing turnaround time. This is, again, this notion of setting up a new system. Well, we've got a great example of it working pretty darn well. I mean, you said sometimes a day turnaround.
They're much like simpler forms, and the hazard tree application as it stands now, you need a standard arborist report that includes a track assessment, and so there is a bit more to review there. Oftentimes there's site considerations with the environmentally critical areas, things like that. So there's a lot of different components layered on top of each other. So while I think that permit can be, or the application can't be as simple or fast, there should be some way to speed it up that incorporates not only just added staff, but kind of a reduction in the amount of time needed to review those actual applications. Perhaps it's standardizing.
What's your background? What are you doing now? Because you clearly know what you're talking about here.
I'm an arborist, yeah.
For one of the
For a
departments?
private tree company.
Okay.
Seattle Tree Company. Yeah, and,
So I asked
Well,
these guys about Portland's model, that there's something simpler than what we're talking about. Does anybody know about that?
Steve, probably
yes,
Okay. The commission has talked about.
He said he wants to make a couple of comments.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, wanted to go back, we'll get to Portland in a second, but wanted to go back to the question of people not on board. I mean, I think most of the people are on board in terms of what's being proposed with the Urban Forestry Commission. There's basically one group, the Seattle Green Spaces Coalition, I believe, which has been pushing for a couple of years for the natural capital and tree survey, et cetera. Those are not necessary to put in place a tree ordinance. In fact, the tree ordinance will help to get some of that information by being able to track tree loss and replacement. That's what was in Burgess's executive order to track tree loss and replacement, and what we're proposing with the permit system. I think a lot of what we've discussed in terms of the cost issue within the Urban Forestry Commission is going to try to keep the cost low for permits, not to have a high cost that, like Portland charges $35 for a tree permit. And I think that's the category that would work. If you put it too high, you're going to discourage people from complying. I think that starting out, you want to keep it simple, but you can always, as we're finding other cities are doing, they make adjustments as time goes on. They try to set it up simple enough to have it take place. SDOT's a prime example. They were charging for permits, yeah. Now they're not charging for permits, realizing it's better to get the information and track the tree loss and replacement, make certain the replacement takes place rather than trying to charge a high fee up front. In terms of the ordinance itself, the other part that we need to ensure is that within the current tree ordinance says that during development, that this is there since 2001, that developers must replace all trees that are over 24 inches DBH and that are exceptional trees, and that's not being done. So what we're trying to do though with this ordinance is to increase the tree canopy by ensuring that trees removed are replaced. But I think we do need to keep it simple. And, you know, Portland has pretty much, I think, put a lot of that in place in terms of a low fee for the permit and a required replacement based on the size of the tree. If the diameter of the tree increases, they're asking for, you know, 2 or 3 trees to replace instead of just 1 tree. That's my comments for the moment.
Great, well,
Thanks, Steve.
it's helpful, Steve, thanks.
Sandra, were you gonna?
I was gonna make the comment that the commission has been pretty agreed on keeping those permit fees for private tree removal low so that they're not a disincentive.
Yeah, I guess my point sort of was that I think everyone agrees that that's the best way to make people participate, or to get people to participate. But the problem is that there's still costs associated, and so, like, I think SDOT's system is funded by other revenues, it's not fee supported. And so this would be taking on, but we have to at least consider what the cost is and balance it against other demands that council members are facing in terms of funding things. And not to say that this isn't a priority, it's just trying to figure out that balance of what the right.
Part of what we've talked about for that issue is looking at how do we ensure that the fee in lieu that would be built into this program could potentially support that function. And if not that, how might penalties or other revenue that would be generated at a much higher rate because we have an established program could potentially support those functions.
Go ahead.
That was something, so I had the opportunity to connect with both Wes and Sandra today to do a little bit more deep dive ahead of this meeting. And those were really important questions that I haven't been able to answer quite yet. And so I think that that's why think.
Well, I would say the
Yeah.
in lieu fee could not be used. It has to be used for planting and establishment only.
I'm sorry, Yolanda.
Fee in lieu could only be used, because of state law, we can only use fee in lieu for actual mitigation of, so for planting and establishment of trees.
I think we're even restricted from using it for
Maintenance.
maintenance.
What about fines and penalties?
I think that is something you can look into, but if your program is successful, you're not going to, it's not a reliable revenue source because you can't actually budget. It's hard to project how much revenue you're going to bring in. And there's probably a hefty cost of enforcement, so oftentimes the fees end up just paying for the enforcement piece, and if you're good and successful at it, you don't need as much enforcement because people stop breaking the law in a good, in an ideal world, or you just.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, but I think it's, something we could think a little bit, but there are challenges there.
So, sorry, really quick. I don't think the Forest Commission is gonna be able to make a call about how the city budgets.
Yeah.
We can give you recommendations and maybe answer questions about trade-offs or, that type of thing. But, at the end of the day, I think what we're gonna come down to is saying, this is an incredibly important thing for the city. It's for the general public, it's for the general good. We've got a general fund. Let's find a way to pay for a system that works. Great.
Yeah, I think it's also really looking at the permit system of trying to create it in a way that doesn't necessarily involve an on-site inspection of the tree, and so it would be putting some onus on an applicant to have a standardized, take a picture with the measuring, making sure it's 6 feet, and if it meets those very desktop review that can easily be done by someone, then then it would be approved and would require some arduous.
That's a really key point that, if this is successful as you put, we are gonna see less violations, and all the time that's spent now looking at enforcement retroactively based on complaints is gonna go away. And a complaint-based system is probably much more labor intensive than what we want to put in place. So there might be some savings there. You're not comparing to the current system, so to speak.
Going back to kind of Steve's point about the $35, the low fee that I think we're all in agreement is pretty critical from an equity standpoint in getting folks to participate. And I think, to SDOT's, just pruning removal, kind of a basic application, that would just collect basic details that requires photo documentation would be a great start, because there are many hazard trees that you can take a couple of sets of photographs and say, wow, that's a problem. And not require arborists or the city arborist to go through these extensive track forms, go on site, and, at this point, basically, you're submitting a very detailed report to which the city arborist is fine-tooth combing, finding any slight variation between what you saw and what they saw, and writing a long, detailed list of corrections required to review it again, which I think is good when a tree case isn't cut and dry. But I think for the most part, hopefully, I think it won't be just a deluge of erroneous, applications, but more so it'll be quick turnaround. But great, thank you so much for submitting this entry-level application. That's a yes, or more information is needed, and that will be done at a review rate of $3.24 an hour, whatever it is.
A lot of cities do that. They'll have a base rate for a really simple situation, and then if it requires more additional staff review, there's an additional fee that's applied. If it requires an arborist, the staff arborist review, for example. So that could be an approach that would help cover some of the cost.
That's also something, in general, we've talked about, if a site's under development, should they pay a different rate? And this approach of having that day rate be applied if additional work's needed, in theory, that would be a good way to have development pay more, but still keep the system very simple. There's one permit for an average homeowner, that would be pretty straightforward, but if it's a big development project that requires additional work from the city, there's this much higher rate that would help capture funds to support the program.
Yeah, right, thank you.
I'll be back in touch with everyone on.
All right, so what do you think next steps? How would you like to proceed? Besides the fact that we'll keep Dan as the point person in my office.
Great. I think, first and foremost, to the extent that you can keep us informed of where things are at, would be great. We unfortunately only meet twice a month, and so the ability to make any sort of turnaround is not always great in terms of our formal recommendations. That said, in-person conversations we love. It would be great if a subset of us could get together with staff, whether it's central staff or from your office. And that's something that can happen in a much more immediate time frame, and we can be much more responsive.
Do you two have anything you want to add to that? Because I know you've got probably a lot of other things on your agenda.
No, I guess I would just add that it's land use legislation, so it comes with all sorts of procedural friction. So it takes, even at the point that we get to a piece of legislation that maybe there is consensus, just in amongst the people in this room, there's a lot of time and process, and so Councilmember Bagshaw will be under some constraint in terms of what is practical. Frankly, this year, just given the city's calendar for when budget starts and all of that, so we're working with her to try to figure out what is achievable, but it's not for lack of trying, and because of all that good process stuff that is meant to allow participation in all of those things, it can feel longer because there's the time to figure out the policy and these big questions and work out the details, and then there's all the procedural stuff that has to happen after that work is done.
Given that, is there a realistic time frame that somebody would be willing to throw out there or estimate?
Well, you talked about phasing too, like we can have a plan, and I have to tell you, I'm the least patient person on the planet, so, the idea for planning take makes me nuts, and especially after you've done it and worked on it for so many years. But I just want to make sure that if we're moving forward, that we do it in such a way that we know what our outcome is we're trying to achieve, and that we reduce and minimize chances of somebody having a successful appeal. That is like, that just sets us back 2 years.
Yeah, I don't.
This is Steve again. I think that, we're much in agreement with the Urban Forestry Commission and also most of the citizen groups in terms of what should be in a tree ordinance. The reason the appeal took place on the last one was because it was still a draft that was changing. And the concern was before you issue a determination of non-significance, it needed to be the final draft, not a draft that was still changing, because you didn't know what the impact would be in terms of the final draft that was undergoing at that point significant changes. There was a rush to try to complete it before the budget process started. Yes, that's not the case. I hope here that we have pretty much last year's work on it, and this year pretty much with the what the city council did in terms of the resolution that was passed along with the NHA ordinance, that you basically agreed to the basic principles that the urban forestry commission has been proposing, and we think there's an awful lot of agreement here. The other thing I wanted to put out in terms of cost, just with why these people are pushing natural capital center assessment, is that you remove trees, that has a lot of cost on the city residents. It increases the urban forest, increases the runoff from trees being removed. It increases health impacts on people in neighborhoods that have less trees. They have higher respiratory problems. There are the whole idea is that you want the urban forest not just because it's nice to look at, but it provides a lot of ecological services to the city. You remove that, you force the city to deal with other impacts through, increased stormwater runoff costs and problems with people's health, et cetera. So I think that that needs to be balanced out with why are we doing this, and it's not just because trees look nice.
Nice, well stated, Steve. All right.
Sorry, I saw a hand.
Yeah, I think the urban forestry commission really wants to be a partner, and kind of help you work through this, help you come up with this new ordinance, and not just be, oh, here it is, what do you think, and have to write a letter. We want to actually be very involved in the process of developing what the ordinance says, so.
One other thing I'll add from the conversation I actually had with Dan today, which was that we have the commission has talked about that there's a lot of details that perhaps could be put into director's rules that would allow flexibility to change if, for instance, we don't get the exact values correct to have the permit be effective. Things like that, I think we would be generally in support of if it meant being able to come to consensus around broader ideas to get something in for it sooner. We've also, as a commission, discussed the notion of stipulating in the ordinance that it's reconsidered in 2 to 3 years, particularly because we have the urban forest management plan being updated and that'll come out. So maybe we stipulate that once the management plan is complete, we revisit the ordinance or some mechanism that allows us to, go back and make sure we got it right, but not hold everything up and risk it because we're trying to get it perfect today.
Yeah, I really like what Sandra's suggesting too, about your being very involved in the drafting. Do you have a former draft that you could take, maybe whatever you did last year, and you guys start there?
Yeah, we have a version of what was then D7 that we've worked almost to completion that reflects the commission's recommendations. So if that's something that you find helpful.
Oh, it totally would be helpful, because I don't want to start from scratch. I really want to start where you are comfortable with, and then we can come back to you with, recommendations from my geniuses that do this work and with the law department saying what more has to happen. But if there's a level where we can go in, now I'm making this up, okay, so don't anybody take this and go running away and saying this is the way it's going to be. But one of the great things about the new Bertha tunnel is that it's free. They're trying to see how to react to it. So maybe there's some way that we can look at this too to say, what if we don't charge people?